In 1776, James Watt made an engine that made steam by burning coal, which drove a piston through a vacuum to generate power. To us nowadays, this may not seem noteworthy, but in 1776, it solidified the beginning of humanity's most important and transformative period in history, the Industrial Revolution. Living life as a peasant farmer family in Britain in the 1770s, much less in the rest of Europe and the world, was more or less the same as it was in the 1500s or even 11th century feudal medieval Europe. Before the Industrial Revolution, most societies were agrarian and rural, with a small portion of the population living in cities. Agriculture was the primary source of livelihood for most people. Any goods you needed, like clothes, cooking materials, and tools, were made by skilled artisans in your community or near a local village, crafting such goods by hand. But there were limitations to this system. Production was slow, and the quality and quantity of goods were constrained. European society was mostly hierarchical and deeply rooted in feudalism. The majority of people were peasants or serfs, tied to the land they worked on and subject to the authority of lords, nobles, and clergy who made up a very small percentage of society. In this system, social mobility was extremely limited, with little opportunity for individuals to move up in the social hierarchy. Starting in the mid-17th century, this status quo began to change with the British Agricultural Revolution. British agriculture was primarily based on a system known as the open field system. Under this system, land was divided into strips, and farmers worked collectively on the fields. However, this traditional method had its limitations. The Enclosure Movement and the General Enclosure Act of 1801 involved fencing off land that was previously shared by the community and transforming it into privately owned property. This allowed landowners to experiment with new farming techniques and increase productivity. Originally, peasants would always plant the same crop in the same field every year. This, however, used up all the nutrients a crop would need in the soil, resulting in poor harvests and local famines. With the Enclosure Movement, landowners adopted new methods like crop rotation, where different crops were planted in sequence to replenish soil nutrients. One year, wheat was planted, the second turnips, followed by barley, so on and so forth. This increased crop yields and improved overall agricultural output. However, the enclosure had some negative consequences too. Many small farmers and peasants were forced off the land as it became concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy landowners. This contributed to the rise of the working class as people moved to cities in search of employment. Another significant advancement of the agricultural revolution was the adoption of new farming machinery. The seed drill, invented by Jethro Tull in 1701, allowed farmers to plant seeds in straight rows, optimizing seed distribution and increasing crop yields. The threshing machine was also introduced, which automated the process of separating grain from husks. The British Agricultural Revolution increased agricultural productivity, leading to a surplus of food and population growth. England and Wales's population of 5.5 million in the year 1700 nearly doubled by 1800. It also paved the way for further advancements down the road. They set the stage for the later Industrial Revolution, where machinery would revolutionize industries beyond agriculture. With a booming population came a booming textile industry for Britain. James Hargreaves' spinning jenny in 1764 reduced the work and time required to produce cloth. Before the spinning jenny, spinning thread from cotton or wool was a tedious and time-consuming task, done mainly by hand. But with the spinning jenny, a single person could spin multiple threads simultaneously. Richard Arkwright's water-powered water frame could spin even stronger threads of yarn than that of the spinning jenny, thanks to the power of flowing water. Samuel Crompton combined the best of both worlds with his creation, the spinning mule. The spinning mule combined the strength of the water frame and the multiple spindles of the spinning jenny. The spinning mule revolutionized the textile industry as it produced high-quality yarn at lightning speed. James Watt's steam engine in 1776 truly marked the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and became the driving force behind the revolution, quite literally. The steam engine took coal and burned it to heat water. The heated water produced steam, which would drive pistons and produce power at great amounts. James Watt was not the original inventor of the steam engine. Earlier, though successful, attempts at creating smaller-scale steam engines in China and Turkey were used to cook food. In Britain, however, steam engines were used to pump and drain water from coal mines. The first steam pump was patented by Thomas Savery in 1698. Thomas Newcomen improved on this design in 1712. In the 1760s, John Smeaton doubled the steam engine's efficiency, but this was still not enough. This led to James Watt working with Matthew Boulton to patent their new engine in 1769. By the early 18th century, most of the trees on the island of Great Britain had been used to build houses and ships, as well as for cooking and heating. In its hunt for anything else to burn, the people of Britain came across chunks of black stone, called coal, near the Earth's surface. Coal burns, producing valuable heat. They were soon digging deeper to mine it. Their coal mines were filled with water that had to be cleared. Horses dragging buckets up proved difficult. The new steam engines, powered by this coal, allowed for quicker and more efficient removal of water from the mines. The harnessing of steam power and the boom in the textile industry played a vital role in powering new factories in Britain. Powered by coal and water, factories emerged as massive industrial complexes, housing hundreds of workers and churning out goods at an unprecedented rate. These factories marked a shift from artisanal craftsmanship to mass production. Skilled artisans were replaced by unskilled laborers, many of whom were victims of enclosure, who could operate the new machinery. This shift caused significant social changes as workers became cogs in the industrial machine, working long hours under harsh conditions. Britain was rich in coal and iron ore, which became the backbone of its industrialization. Plus, its extensive canal and river systems allowed for efficient transportation of goods, linking different regions and markets. Plus, Britain was beginning to project its power worldwide. By 1763, Britain had hegemony over North America's fur trade. Trading posts in Western Africa allowed Britain to tap into the transatlantic slave trade to fuel the growth of cash crops in the Caribbean. And recent victories in India started the British East India Company's slow rise to power. These imperial ambitions meant access to vast colonial markets and raw materials for Britain to fuel the burgeoning Industrial Revolution. Not only was steam power used in factories, but it also dramatically changed transportation and how people got around. The massive output of the textile industry demanded new, innovative ways to transport and export these goods en masse. In 1804, Richard Trevithick built the first full-scale working steam locomotive in Cornwall, England. But it was George Stephenson, the father of railways, who truly revolutionized the steam locomotive industry. Stephenson's rocket, built in 1829, was a marvel of engineering for its time. It had a multi-tubular boiler, which allowed it to generate more steam, making it faster and more efficient. The rocket's success sparked a boom in railway construction across Britain and the world. It wasn't long before railroads began spreading like a network of veins, connecting cities, towns, and industries in Britain. Trains could carry goods and people at unprecedented speeds, making the world smaller and more interconnected. For the first time, people could travel long distances quickly and affordably. It revolutionized tourism, allowed for the efficient movement of armies, and spurred urbanization. Cities grew around railway stations, shaping the landscape of our modern world. In 1807, the Industrial Revolution took its first baby steps outside of Great Britain. Two Englishmen, William and John Cockerell, brought the Industrial Revolution to Belgium by developing machine shops in the city of Liège. Its economy, like Britain's, transformed around the production of textiles, coal, and iron. From there, it slowly spread into France and the fractured German states. The bloody French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars distracted France, and to an extent, the rest of Europe, from developing an industry of its own. However, by 1830, French firms had employed many skilled British workers to help establish their domestic textile industry. Germany was a bit slower in building its industry since there was no centralized government at the time, and political upheaval made industrialization difficult. However, German coal and iron output increased after the 1840s, and by the 1850s, a vast rail network was under development. With Germany's unification under the Kingdom of Prussia in 1871, the new German Empire outpaced Britain in industrial productivity on the European mainland. As the Industrial Revolution swept through Europe, new machines and factories changed the face of labor. But not everyone was thrilled with the rapid pace of progress. The new machines of the Industrial Revolution dramatically reduced the need for skilled artisans and a professional workforce. Traditional skilled labor was being replaced by machines that could produce goods faster and cheaper, leaving many workers unemployed and destitute. These workers saw these machines as a threat to their way of life. They believed that the Industrial Revolution was eroding the dignity of labor, turning people into mere cogs in a giant machine. Out of this desperation, the Luddite movement was born. Named after a mythical figure, Ned Ludd, who was said to have destroyed knitting machines in the late 18th century, the Luddites took direct action against the new industrial technology. Luddites took to the streets of England throughout the 1810s, smashing machines, burning factories, and demanding change. In response, the British government began cracking down on the Luddite movement. In 1812, the British Parliament passed a severe law imposing the death penalty for those caught breaking machines. The army was deployed to protect factories and disperse large worker protests, sometimes resulting in casualties. By 1816, the Luddite movement was losing strength as the British economy improved after a period of recession. Although there were sporadic machine-breaking incidents in the 1830s, they were less impactful. Industrialization and the sharp increase in demand for jobs put the Luddite movement and its way of life in the coffin. Amid all the clanking gears and rising smoke of factories of the late 18th century, a group of artists, poets, and thinkers began starting to question the cost of this rapid progress. Romantics, as they were called, longed for a return to nature, to the wild and untamed landscapes that spoke to the soul. They celebrated the mysterious and awe-inspiring power of nature, finding solace and inspiration in its untamed beauty. They feared a world where nature's beauty was being steamrolled by factories, where the human spirit seemed overshadowed by the gears of progress. Romantics also celebrated individualism and the power of emotion. They were all about embracing the messy, raw, and intense aspects of the human experience. It was a rebellion against the rigid rationalism of the Enlightenment era that came before. They looked back to a mythical past, a simpler time of knights and ladies, where nature and humanity were more intertwined. This nostalgia for the past was about yearning for a world where harmony existed between humans and the natural world before the steam engine rolled in with its clanging gears and pollution. By embracing these ideas, Romanticism revolutionized the arts. Literature, painting, and music all blossomed with this new approach to creativity. Poets like Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Lord Byron delved into the realms of the imagination, exploring themes of love, loss, and the supernatural. The lasting impact of Romanticism is hard to overstate. It laid the groundwork for the environmental movement as it sparked a newfound appreciation for nature and a concern for its preservation. It also played a significant role in shaping the ideals of nationalism, as many Romantic artists celebrated their unique cultures and traditions. The United States was an early adopter of the Industrial Revolution. Much like Europe, the American economy before 1800 relied on agriculture. Sadly, a significant portion of that was fueled by the labor of enslaved Africans. The transatlantic slave trade was in full swing, with millions of people forcibly taken from their homes and sent to work on plantations, growing cash crops like tobacco, rice, and, most importantly, cotton. Following the end of the American Revolutionary War in 1783, America's northern states, like New York and Pennsylvania, passed abolitionist laws that forbade the practice of slavery. Southern states, however, like Virginia and Georgia, did not. Similarly, Britain abolished slavery in 1801. In the United States, the Industrial Revolution was intertwined with the expansion of cotton production. The cotton gin, invented by Eli Whitney in 1793, made it much easier to separate cotton seeds from the fluffy fibers, dramatically increasing cotton production. But with the rise in cotton demand, the need for cheap labor skyrocketed. Slavery in the southern states boomed to meet this demand, perpetuating an incredibly dark chapter in history. Unlike the southern states, the northern states turned to industrialization. Cities like New York, Pittsburgh, and Boston turned into bustling hubs of industry and commerce. New farm machinery allowed the northern states to produce half of the nation's corn, 4/5 of its wheat, and 7/8 of its oats by 1860, rapidly outpacing agricultural outputs in the South. Rapid industrialization in the North led millions from across Europe to seek new lives in America and fill up new positions in the factories. Much like in Britain, destitute farmers flocked to urban areas in the North. By 1860, 26% of the northern population lived in urban areas. Only about a tenth of the southern population lived in urban areas. The North and South's wildly different economic systems led to clashes between the two. One big bone of contention was the debate over slavery in the newly acquired territories. As the nation expanded westward, the question of whether these new states would permit slavery or not sparked heated debates in Congress. Both sides feared the idea of the other gaining more influence in government and economy would end their way of life. The election of 1860 was a pivotal moment in American history. Abraham Lincoln, a Republican from the North who opposed the expansion of slavery, was elected president. This did not sit well with the South, fearing that their way of life was under threat. As tensions reached a boiling point, Southern states seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America in a bid to preserve slavery. The American Civil War erupted, pitting the industrialized North against the agrarian South. The war, fought from 1861 to 1865, was a devastating conflict that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives and left a lasting impact on the nation. In the end, though, slavery was abolished across the country. Millions of freed black slaves were left to form their fates in America. However, black people in America were not guaranteed full civil rights until 1968, over a century after the end of the war. The American Civil War is typically coined as the First Industrial War, as it effectively made use of new developments throughout the Industrial Revolution and firearms technology. Innovations in communication, transportation, and manufacturing had a profound impact on warfare going forward. Trains and advanced logistics played a crucial role in the industrial warfare of the 19th century. Trains allowed for rapid troop movement, more supplies, and faster logistics. Armies could now concentrate forces and respond quickly to enemy actions. Thusly, many of the American Civil War's battles focused on gaining control of railway hubs like Manassas, Chattanooga, and Atlanta. The telegraph connected distant locations instantaneously. This real-time communication helped commanders coordinate strategies and receive intelligence more effectively. For instance, Union General William Sherman, during his campaign through Georgia, was in near constant communication with Ulysses S. Grant in Petersburg, a distance of over 400 miles. But perhaps the most significant technological leap was the development of rifled firearms and artillery. Rifled muskets extended the effective range of infantry, making warfare more lethal and requiring new tactics to adapt. Limbs hit by the new rifled mini-ball, a precursor to the bullet, often required outright amputation because the wounds were so horrible. Rifled muskets exposed the limitations of traditional Napoleonic tactics. In a bid to recreate the military genius of Napoleon, commanders failed to account for new advancements in military technology, leading to catastrophic casualties in battles like Antietam, Shiloh, and Fredericksburg. After the war, America and the Western world was forced to reconsider their approach to the traditional line formations of old. The Industrial Revolution spurred the development of military technology elsewhere in Europe. Alongside rifled muskets came breech-loading rifles. Before the 19th century, soldiers mainly used muzzle-loading muskets, which were slow and cumbersome to reload. But with breech-loading rifles, soldiers could load bullets from the rear of the barrel, making them quicker to reload and increasing their firing rates. Prussia's expansionist policies during its path of German unification saw it use the new Drese needle gun to devastating effect during the Austro-Prussian War in 1866 and the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. Union cavalry made extensive use of repeating rifles in the later half of the Civil War. These rifles could fire multiple shots without reloading bullets after every single shot, revolutionizing the battlefield and giving soldiers an edge they never had before. Repeating rifles became icons of the Wild West after the war's end. The Civil War was also the birthplace of another weapon, the Gatling gun. With the use of a crank and 10 rotating barrels, soldiers could fire 200 bullets a minute. This design mimics earlier guns much like it, like the Puckle gun. However, Richard Gatling's design went on to inspire the development of more effective, faster, and powerful machine guns. In 1884, Hiram Maxim unveiled the Maxim gun, the first self-powered machine gun. It used the recoil energy generated by firing to cycle the weapon and chamber the next round. This made it capable of virtually infinitely sustained automatic fire and dramatically increased the rate of fire on the battlefield. The Maxim gun quickly gained popularity and became a standard feature in many European armies by the late 19th century. Cannons and artillery also underwent significant changes. Traditional smoothbore cannons were replaced by rifled artillery, which had grooves in the barrel to spin the projectile, improving its accuracy and range. This increased the effectiveness of artillery, enabling it to hit targets more accurately and from greater distances. While Western Europe and the United States enjoyed and suffered the benefits and negatives of the Industrial Revolution, much of the rest of the world was left out. Two countries, however, recognized that they'd be left in the dust of technological progress if they did not step up to join their Western contemporaries. Russia, the vast expanse of land stretching from Europe to Asia, was ruled by Catherine the Great in the late 18th century. Catherine was a smart and savvy leader, but she was also wary of some of the radical ideas coming from Western Europe, including the ideas and innovations of the new Industrial Revolution. To an extent, Catherine was a Luddite. Russia was an agricultural powerhouse, with most of its population toiling away on farms. Catherine didn't see the need to change the traditional ways of life. Still, coal mining and steel operations continued to prop up in Russia, albeit they were few and far between. Following Russia's disastrous defeat in the Crimean War in 1856, Tsar Alexander II recognized the need for reform. Much of his drive for industrialization centered around railroad construction, connecting the largest country on Earth's sparse urban areas. These efforts culminated with the completion of the Trans-Siberian Railway in 1916. Japan in Eastern Asia was another proprietor of its industrial revolution. For centuries prior, Japan had been ruled by a feudal system, with the samurai class at the top, and the emperor as a symbolic figurehead. Japan's foreign policy of isolation, restricting itself from contact with the outside world, was challenged when foreign powers, specifically the United States, forced it to open its doors for trade in 1853. By the mid-19th century, the samurai class recognized that they were falling behind the Western powers in terms of military and industrial strength. After their takeover of the Japanese government in 1868, the Meiji Restoration, they decided to industrialize and centralize the country under the emperor's rule. Japan embraced Western ideas, and they sent scholars and experts to learn from the industrialized countries. The government invested heavily in infrastructure, factories, and education. Much like Europe, Japan sought sources for raw materials as it lacked much of its own. Imperial ambitions resulted in the annexation of the Korean peninsula and the First Sino-Japanese War around the turn of the century. Russia's and Japan's attempts at industrialization in the mid-19th century correlated with the rise of the Second Industrial Revolution. In 1856, Sir Henry Bessemer patented the Bessemer process, making steel the backbone of modern industrialization and infrastructure. Stronger and more durable than iron, steel revolutionized construction and transportation. The Bessemer process made steel production more efficient, allowing for more factories, bigger cities, and more railroads. Much like the First Industrial Revolution, the Second Revolution brought about immense changes in technology, society, and economics. One major difference was that people could now see during the night. Thanks to electricity and light bulbs, the streets of cities were more navigable during the night. For all of human history up to this point, people stopped working when the sun went down. Now, since people could see what they were doing during the night, workers were assigned more shifts in the factories. Shopkeepers could operate for longer hours. People could stay up longer. Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla's contributions to electricity were fundamental to its development. Edison's direct current system, or DC, in the 1870s, was used in underground conductors to supply electricity to homes and businesses, eventually coming to supply all of New York City's entire electric grid. In the 1880s, Nikola Tesla developed the alternating current system, or AC, a system of electricity distribution that could transmit power over long distances more efficiently. AC could be transformed into different voltage levels, making it more adaptable and practical for widespread use. The two inventors were locked in a heated rivalry called the War of the Currents, as both did their best to promote their electricity system and discredit the other. Edison eventually lost the battle as companies like General Electric favored the flexibility of AC. The Second Industrial Revolution also gave rise to the pioneers of the automobile, Carl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler. In the 1880s, both Benz and Daimler independently developed gasoline-powered engines that were compact enough to be fitted into a vehicle. These inventions marked the birth of the automobile, but it wasn't until 1886, when Carl Benz patented the motor wagon, that the first true automobile was born. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, more automobile manufacturers started popping up across Europe and the United States. However, these early cars were custom-made luxury items, available only to the wealthy elite. Henry Ford looked to change that. Ford was an ambitious and innovative, albeit controversial and racist entrepreneur who had a vision to make cars affordable for everyone. He wanted to create a vehicle that could be within reach of the average working person. And thus, he introduced the Model T. The Model T was not the first car, but it was the first affordable car designed for mass production. Ford's genius lay not just in the car's design, but in his innovative approach to manufacturing. This is where the idea of Fordism comes in. Henry Ford developed the assembly line, a revolutionary method of production that allowed cars to be made quickly and efficiently. Instead of workers building an entire car, each worker specialized in a specific task, and the car moved along the line, with each worker adding a part until the vehicle was complete. The assembly line drastically reduced production time and costs. However, the success of the Model T was not just due to the assembly line. Ford also implemented another revolutionary concept, paying his workers a higher wage. By paying his employees $5 a day, double the average industrial wage at the time, Ford ensured that his workers could afford the very cars they were producing. This not only created a dedicated and loyal workforce, but also expanded the potential customer base for the Model T. Between 1908 and 1927, Ford produced over 15 million Model Ts, making it one of the most influential and best-selling cars in history. It was a testament to the power of mass production and the impact of Fordism. The success of Ford's approach did not go unnoticed. Other American car manufacturers, like General Motors and Chrysler, soon adopted similar production methods, and mass production became a hallmark of the 20th century Industrial Revolution. As industries expanded, companies grew, and modern capitalism took shape, so did the demand for labor. Countless men, women, and even children toiled long hours in unsafe, overcrowded factories and mines. Health conditions were appalling, with poor ventilation leading to respiratory issues and the constant exposure to hazardous chemicals causing severe health problems. Exposure to very fast and dangerous machines saw many workers experience permanent disfigurement or death. Child labor was tragically widespread, with kids as young as 6 or 7 years old working in dangerous environments instead of attending school or enjoying their childhoods. Their small bodies and nimble fingers made them ideal for many tasks, but at the expense of their physical and mental well-being. The poor and orphaned were particularly employed. As for female labor, many women found opportunities in the factories. This was because they were paid significantly less than their male counterparts for the same amount of work and the same grueling conditions. Amidst this bleak landscape, workers began to organize and fight for better conditions, birthing what is now known as the labor movement. Unions emerged as a means of collective bargaining, where workers united to demand fair wages, safer workplaces, and reasonable working hours. Strikes were a powerful tool employed by laborers to put pressure on employers and demonstrate their unity. One notable example was the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 in the United States. It began when the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad announced yet another wage cut amidst an economic downturn. Railroad workers from various states staged a massive strike that quickly spread across the nation. However, the strike turned violent in many places, leading to clashes with law enforcement and the military. 100 lost their lives. But this event also highlighted the importance of workers' rights and the need for better labor laws. But perhaps the most iconic example of the struggle between workers and powerful corporate interests was the Battle of Blair Mountain in 1921. In West Virginia, coal miners had had enough of being exploited and mistreated by mining companies. They fought for better pay, improved working conditions, and an end to the oppressive company towns that kept them in virtual bondage. This battle was, in essence, a massive armed labor uprising. Around 10,000 miners marched to confront the anti-union forces, backed by the coal companies and local authorities. The clashes were fierce, going so far as to see the first aerial bombardment on American soil, seeing over 100 from all sides killed. Eventually, federal troops were called in to quell the uprising. The Battle of Blair Mountain resulted in little or no gain for Union miners, but continued to be used as a rallying cry for workers' rights. Not only were workers' rights exploited, but also human rights. As European powers experienced the industrial boom, they found themselves in dire need of new markets and raw materials to fuel their factories. Enter colonization, the practice of claiming foreign territories and exploiting their resources. Countries like Britain, France, Germany, and others embarked on a race to control vast stretches of Africa and Asia. Africa, in particular, became the focal point of imperial ambition. With the Berlin Conference of 1884 convened by Europeans only for Europeans, the scramble for Africa saw nearly the entire continent carved up by European powers by 1900. Imperial powers used various justifications for colonization: the white man's burden, social Darwinism, and the idea of spreading civilization. But let's call it what it was: a brutal conquest for resources, wealth, and power. African cultures, economies, and political structures were disregarded and disrupted in the name of European expansion. The colonies became more than just a source of raw materials. They also became captive markets for manufactured goods produced in Europe. It was a parasitic relationship of exploitation and dependence. Meanwhile, in Asia, India was the crown jewel of the British Empire. The British East India Company controlled vast territories, exporting India's wealth back to Britain and flooding the Indian market with cheap, mass-produced textiles, putting local artisans out of business. Similar practices occurred in French Indochina and Dutch Indonesia. By 1914, the First and Second Industrial Revolutions left an indelible mark on human history and society. Innovations in textile manufacturing, transportation, and communication accelerated human progress like never before. Better, stronger, and more efficient steel with the Bessemer process made buildings sturdier and more prevalent. These buildings were lit up with the invention of electric light bulbs, and electricity went on to power new forms of mass production and new forms of communication. The rise of factories and urbanization led to significant social and economic changes. Working conditions were often harsh, with long hours and low wages, especially for the poor laborers who fueled the industrial machine. Many workers protested, looking for better wages and better working conditions, going so far as to put their lives on the line. The exponential demands of the two industrial revolutions fueled the rise of imperialism as major powers scrambled to conquer and exploit overseas territories, guaranteeing themselves easy access to raw resources at the cost of the bloody exploitation of local peoples. Conflicting interests and clashing imperialism and an increasingly nationalistic fervor paired with a desire to use new weapons of war thanks to the Industrial Revolution ultimately led to the outbreak of the War to End All Wars in 1914. The complex web of alliances between European nations gave way to a giant game of tug-of-war, with each country pulling the others into a brutal and senseless conflict. The war brought unparalleled destruction and loss of life. Trench warfare became the gruesome hallmark of the conflict, with soldiers hunkering down in muddy, disease-ridden trenches, facing unimaginable horrors. And when the dust settled and the guns fell silent in 1918, the world was forever changed. Empires crumbled, borders were redrawn, and a new world order emerged. The war left a bitter legacy of trauma and disillusionment, leading to new ideologies like communism and fascism, ultimately fueling future conflicts.